My name is Jarad Carleton. I'm a industry principal at Frost Sullivan. I lead the cybersecurity research team for the European region. And what we're going to look at today are some issues around digital trust and security maturity, again, based on some of the work that we've done, some statistical research that we've wrapped in qualitative analysis. So some of the data that you see here, you can rest assured that we have 95% levels of statistical confidence. I want to start out by taking a look at the state of data breaches in the European Union, because we had GDPR that was passed May 18th of 2018. And as we can see, the situation doesn't look super. There's still a lot of data breaches occurring. Now, what's interesting is if we take a look at a couple of the giant economies in Europe, we see that there's a large number of data breaches happening in those geographies, but that's not the entire story here. The interesting story is when we look at things on a per capita basis, and then we start to see that Germany and the UK, per capita, their data breaches are much lower than in some of these other countries, Ireland, Denmark, Finland. Netherlands remains in the top for some odd reason. The point that I'm bringing up here is that when we're looking at statistical data points, when we're trying to expand our markets, for example, beyond Israel and up into Europe, we generally think about some of the larger economies. And I think that sometimes that's to the detriment of smaller economies that may have lower hanging fruit for us to sell into, right? So that's something to think about. And when we're talking about, for example, a company or a country like the Netherlands, where English is freely spoken, that could be a real good area of opportunity. So GDPR was a revision of European Union Data Privacy Directive. And they brought it up to date with some of the things that are happening in technology today, because even though we had a data privacy directive in the European Union, there was still a lot of things happening that really didn't align with the whole concept of data privacy. Here, they say that for the most egregious violations, you're looking at a regulatory fine, a maximum possible regulatory fine. Okay, so this is just the maximum, not stuff, of 20 million euros or 4% of gross annual worldwide revenue, whichever is greater, for each violation. This is the stuff that gets the attention of boards of directors. They're trying to change the game, and they are. Now, that's not to say that everyone is compliant. They had 2 years. Everyone in Europe had 2 years to get ready for this. They all knew it was coming. There are a lot of companies that are still not compliant, but they're scrambling to get different technologies and processes in place so that they are fully compliant. And it's not just only about reporting data breaches. You have to say that you had a breach. You have to be able to tell the DPA, the Data Protection Authority, in the appropriate country, what data was breached. You have to tell them what happened and what your mitigation steps are going to be. So it isn't just as simple as saying, "Whoa, we found out something happened, there you go," and walk away. So, digital trust, what is it? Here's the definition, and I think it's important to understand it. The confidence placed in an organization to collect, store, and use the digital information of others, all of us in this room, in a manner that benefits and protects those to whom the information pertains, okay? So what we did in the face of all these breaches happening, not just in Europe, but around the world, the index scores between 1 and 100. So we try to quantify things, to put things, in a way that we can all kind of understand and make sense of. So looking across the world, we see right now that end users, people like you and me in a variety of different countries, the digital trust score is 61. And when we compare it against how organizations, both information security professionals and line of business executives, think their end customers perceive them, there's a perception gap of 14 points. Businesses think that their customers trust them more than what they actually do. Before we do that, we're going to take a closer look at this and how this is broken out. Out of the consumers that we surveyed here, we found out that only 25% have very high digital trust, and the rest of them are moderate or low. But what does this really mean for bottom line for businesses that are dealing with consumers around the world? Well, if we look at the low digital trust consumers, that's some pretty healthy growth, net change of 28%. So you're thinking, well, what's the big deal, right? If we take a look at moderate trust, we see the net change in online spending is even greater, and it's even more for high trust individuals. So really the question is, for businesses that are interacting and have revenue streams online, do you really want to restrict your growth by doing things that don't align with proper security practices, that put business data and PII at risk, and in turn restrict your revenue growth? What I want to do is take a look. We've looked at kind of a global view. The global average digital trust score for end users, consumers, is 61. But it's different for our region. And we see here that Europe is particularly low, and there's one outlier in the Asia Pacific region, and that's Australia. Now, the reason we think it's lower in Europe is a couple of different things. You have the whole issue of what happened during World War II, and then what happened during the Cold War, where personal data was used to institutionalize human rights abuses and discrimination. Germany is the canary in the coal mine. They had a lot going on with World War II, and then during the Cold War, with the country being separated, they understand the dangers of not properly protecting data. And they tend to be very skeptical in conducting online business. And I also see this in Austria to an extent. This shows some of the factors that consumers are looking for when they're doing business with a company online. And the interesting thing is that there are two areas that really get into the whole thing of social contact. Well, I know somebody who uses this service and it's a well-known brand, or there's people that I know that are using it and they recommend it. This is what people in Europe always say to me: can I send you a WhatsApp message? I said, no, you can't send me a WhatsApp message. It's a Facebook company. I don't do business with them. I don't have an account with them. I don't want them knowing anything about me. Well, what do you mean? And if none of you know what I mean about Facebook, then get on, Google some things. Free service. There are no free things. If the service is free, the product is you. User authentication process. This is an interesting area because you see, for example, consumers saying, you know what, things need to be more secure than they are convenient. But you always hear businesses saying, we can't do that because it's going to cost us business, right? Obviously, the IT security folks, they're saying, wait a minute, if we make things more complex and less convenient, that means we're going to get more help desk requests. That's going to take up a lot of our time. The line of business execs, they're worried about, well, that might slow the revenue flow. But what neither of them are really realizing is that people that are doing business with them online are really saying, you know what, yeah, maybe my password hygiene isn't as good, but I've heard of different types of authentication technologies out there that might make my life a little bit easier from this password hell that we're all dealing with. And we need to raise the bar, is what consumers are saying. And businesses have yet to catch up on this. And I think it's something that's very important. There are different technologies out there that certain companies can be doing to raise the bar. And we're not talking about things like mobile transaction authentication numbers that come over SMS, because that's inherently insecure anyway. But that said, let's pivot and take a look at a couple of other things. Marketing claims and false self-perception, or cognitive dissonance. The interesting thing here is that line of business executives are claiming that they differentiate by providing better privacy. We've got about 92% saying that they differentiate on privacy. We've got about 89% saying, you know what, we offer really good security. And then we see about half of them have been part of a data breach in the recent past. And of those, 3/4 of them have been involved in a data breach in the past year. So where does this connect? They're offering better privacy, they're really secure, and fully half of these people are in companies where there have been data breaches. When we take a look at how information security professionals perceive their security investments, they mainly have a very positive view. And of course, when they see something that might be a negative return, then maybe they got fooled into some kind of security theater type of solution or process. But here's the problem. Line of business executives, some of which have influence over security budget, there's over 25%, over 1/4 of line of business executives are saying we're not getting a positive return out of our security investment. And the issue here is that they don't necessarily understand the value that they're getting from some of the security technologies. And so it's the job of sales and marketing forces, like Analyst, for instance, to show them the value that they're getting by implementing certain solutions. When we take a look at this issue, we find that in Europe, half of large organizations are in the underprepared category. So how do we know this? We did a study on security maturity, and we asked some very pointed questions about technologies and processes and cloud adoption, organizational culture, individual behaviors versus different perceptions inside of the organization. And we were able to obtain this information, determining that about 50% of organizations, large organizations in Europe, are underprepared. But what does that really mean? Well, this kind of comes back to something that I showed all you guys earlier. They're claiming higher trust, they're claiming higher security, and this is why the qualitative metrics aren't working. We need to find a way to quantitatively measure what it is we're doing inside of organizations to secure them and to improve security going forward. Because if we can't measure this, then we don't know if we're backsliding or if we're getting better. Some final thoughts, because there are a lot of companies out there that are doing things right. And when we looked at security maturity in Europe, we determined some of the top 5 things that security leaders are doing right. They have a CISO. CISO is organizing the security strategy for the organization going forward. They're not just fighting fires, they're actually developing a forward-thinking strategy and running security inside the organization as a business. Okay? They are using and operationalizing threat intelligence, and they are automating certain security processes, which is good because a lot also has some technology that helps to automate things for small and medium-sized enterprise that are purchasing certain things through CSPs. They have established formal security processes, guidelines, and training for all departments, and people know where these policies are. It isn't one of these things where something happens and they go, where's the playbook? That happens in the 52% that are underprepared. They've implemented the defined incident response procedures, communicated that across all departments. So that was me reading ahead the playbook and where to find it. So when there is a data breach in Europe and you've got 72 hours to report to the DPA, what are all the things that you've got to go through and all the different technologies and processes that you have in place so that you are in compliance. And then, as I'd also said, the periodic 360-degree reviews inside the organization. So I think the one thing that you can all get out of this is that European businesses need help. We do have data breach fatigue in the European Union, but it's also the same thing in the United States. There is a swelling data breach and privacy backlash. You see that because GDPR was enacted in Europe. Many organizations are still not in compliance. I can tell you for a fact that the situation gets worse when you get into smaller sized organizations. The backlash is not just in Europe. You've got the Personal Information Privacy Act in Japan, and next year in my home state, the California version of GDPR goes into effect. So we may start to see some changes in the way that Silicon Valley operates, because when something happens in California, the reason it has an impact is not because I'm all proud of where I come from. It's because it's the 5th largest economy in the entire world, and that has impact. And so this is kind of a summary of all the different things that we've talked about. When we're talking about implementing security in an organization, it has to not just be in the IT department, but also in the customer-facing operations, in R&D and other types of operations, as well as in all the support functions. Okay. So, in summary, final thoughts. Germany, the canary in the coal mine. This needs to be paid attention to because there will be digital trust that's falling in other countries. We've already seen it start in Australia. We've seen it start in the UK as well. I expect it's going to spread to other developed economies in the near future if companies can't get a handle on protecting data. And there are technologies out there to effectively do it. The problem is that a lot of organizations don't understand the connection between maturity, falling digital trust, and slowing revenue growth. And that's something that really needs to be communicated. And I think that it helps companies that are trying to sell products that are securing business to bring this up and to use some of this information in their sales and marketing communications. Thank you for having me.